More and more players are coming off the board here. We have signings, and the Tigers continue to not do a whole lot. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the players that are still available and more, all today on Locked On Tigers.
You are Locked On Tigers, your daily Detroit Tigers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Tigers. I'm, of course, your host, Scott Bentley. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd, 2025. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off of your first purchase. Welcome in, welcome all. Happy Wednesday. We're at the halfway point in the week here. We got some fun stuff to talk about. We got some more serious stuff to talk about. All of it we will correlate back to. We will tie in to your Detroit Tigers. We're going to spend the first half or so of the show just talking about moves that have happened. There was a couple players that have been rumored to be on the Tigers' radar at some point that have gone off the board over the last 48 hours. We'll talk about that, how it impacts, players like Bregman, who, for me, I'm recording this a little bit before 7 p.m., right after the Hall of Fame announcements on Tuesday evening. Bregman has still not signed, so we'll talk about that, where the Tigers stand there. Evan Petzold of the Free put out an update in terms of that situation. We're going to talk about free agents that are still on the board besides him as well. Flaherty, Ha-Sung Kim. Then we'll talk about the Hall of Fame voting a little bit and some other smaller stuff in there as well. So to start off, Anthony Santander signs with the Toronto Blue Jays. $92 million over 5 years, or after year 3, there is an opt-in where the Blue Jays can opt in to the deal, and it can basically turn into a 6-year, $110 million deal. Kind of a weird thing, but either way, it's around a little bit over $18 million a year, no matter which ends up happening, whether it ends up being 5 years or 6 years. The math is a little bit over 18 mil for both of those. So would, immediately everybody's first reaction in this fan base is that something that the Tigers should have done, right? The amount of years is a little bit high for me. I'm not sure I would have been comfortable going to, 6 years of Anthony Santander, but at the end of the day, that is how you lock up talent. You have to give up years at some point in order to bring in free agent talent. And 18 mil AAV is not very much. That's less than the qualifying offer was this year. No? If it's not less, it's very much around that. I'm pretty sure it is a little bit less than what the QO was this year. So on a year-to-year basis, you're not talking about a super steep price tag these days, which is so funny how times change. I remember when, the qualifying offer was first introduced and it was like 13 or 14 mil, right? And you just look around and salary, obviously that's just like, we don't have to get into a conversation about how like the economy works and everything, but just seeing the price tags get higher and higher for players over the years is fascinating. And so I really think this is pretty good value for the Blue Jays. I think Toronto should be happy. Really, I'm just happy that Toronto got anybody. I'm happy for our brothers and sisters of the North that are finally the not the bridesmaids and are the brides. Good for them to be able to not be, second place on a signing and actually bring somebody in. I'm happy for you, Toronto. It'll be a good add to that lineup. As far as its effect is the word on the Detroit Tigers, I don't think they were ever serious players on Santander. I never got that impression. Now, I could be dead wrong about that, but I never got the vibe or the feel or heard anything that made me believe that the Tigers were seriously pursuing Anthony Santander. I think that was always more of, and we talked about this on the show, probably 2 months ago now, but a while ago, earlier in the offseason, where it was the Santander interest was very contingent on what happened with Bregman. And it was like, okay, well, if Bregman signs relatively quickly and some team gives him 200 mil and the Tigers aren't willing to do that, then maybe they'll kick the tires on a player like Santander or, on a couple of the other corner outfielders that have been, right. We talked about Teoscar Hernandez back in November, like all of that. But as the offseason got further and further along and it became more and more clear that the Tigers were kind of, we'll talk about this in a second. It almost looks like they're just putting all their chips in the Bregman basket here, which is certainly a decision. So we'll see what happens. I'm not heartbroken at them not getting Santander, but at the same time, I think this is pretty good value for Toronto as well. A player that I am upset is not going to be a Detroit Tiger that they were rumored to have interest in earlier in the offseason is Kirby Yates, who, this is going to shock you, signs with the Los Angeles Dodgers, who another rich get richer situation. They just continue to get everyone, and they are building an evil empire over there, and everyone's going to hate them. And there is a very clear villain in the game of baseball that everyone will be rooting against, and that is the Los Angeles Dodgers. So from just Kirby Yates in a vacuum, I really wanted him. I thought that it was a really good fit for the Tigers. I've talked a lot this winter about how I really want the Tigers to get and bring in a high leverage swing and miss reliever that can get whiffs and strikeouts at any moment in the game and at any point when called upon, right? And Kirby Yates is very much that. He is a very good swing and miss strikeout pitcher. Had a sub-2 ERA last season. He's really good. He's pushing 40, but it's reliever. You're not signing him to a 6-year deal. So yeah, he's the newest Los Angeles Dodger, which feels like something we say pretty much every day. But he is currently, at the time of this recording, the newest addition to the Dodgers, which means he won't be a Tiger. That does kind of beg the question of what is the bullpen going to look like? Are we just kind of just set then? We're not going to add too much to the pen this offseason. It's just going to be a from within situation. It wouldn't surprise me if they signed one of the mid-tier or lower, relievers that are still out there. Like there's always going to be relievers that are somewhat available on the market, right? So it wouldn't surprise me if they got a cheaper option as we get closer to spring training, just to add depth and competition, and maybe somebody who they think they can get to have that high strikeout number. But if they don't bring in anybody, if they don't, and this is an if, I don't know this to be certain or anything. I can't predict the future yet, unfortunately. If they don't, then there is a ton of pressure on Alex Lang this year. A ton. Because he's going to have to be that guy. And that's not to say that nobody else in this bullpen can get strikeouts, but there's not a single reliever in the bullpen right now that is a strikeout guy, right? There's a very clear difference between those two things. And that's why the Tigers blew a handful of games last year in the ninth when a runner was on base because they didn't have anyone else to go to. And it was like, okay, let's bring out Jason Foley, who's just going to get a ground ball. And if it's seeing eye and gets through the infield, then you're toast. They need someone that can get swings and misses for them when called upon, and they do not have that at a really high-end clip right now. So, healthy Alex Lang is going to have to be that option for them. And we have not seen him throw strikes consistently enough for him to, I don't think, reliably have like the entire fan base just be like, oh yeah, like that'll work out, right? That there's not a ton of confidence there. So that'll be a big conversation, a big talking point going into spring training for sure. But we'll see what the rest of the offseason brings us. We still got a month or so well, actually a little bit less than a month until pitchers and catchers report. So probably about a month of signings left. We'll see what happens. But for now, that is kind of the outlook of the bullpen. It was a good bullpen. I'm not saying I'm terrified that this bullpen's going to suck, but there's a very key thing missing from it as well. And we'll see who can fill that role this year. And if Alex Lane can step up and come back from injury and throw a little bit more strikes. All right. Let's talk Bregman because we pretty much do this every single episode at this point. We'll do that right after this. Got to talk to y'all today about our friends over at Select Quote. In sports, having a winning strategy is everything. It's how the best teams make it to the Super Bowl, the World Series, and the Olympics. The same goes for life. Having a strategy like life insurance from Select Quote can protect your financial legacy and keep your family's future secure. Select Quote makes it easy to find the perfect life insurance policy. As one of America's leading insurance brokers with over 40 million years, how about 40 years of experience, they've helped over 2 million customers find $700 billion in coverage since 1985. What sets Select Quote apart is their personal touch. Unlike other brokers that offer one-size-fit-all policies, their licensed agents tailor coverage to fit your unique needs. If you're in good health, you might even qualify for same-day coverage of up to $5 million, no medical exam required. And it's more affordable than you'd think. You can get up to $1 million in coverage for as little as $20 a month. Get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/lockedon. Go to selectquote.com/lockedon today to get started at selectquote.com/lockedon. Select Quote, they shop, you save. All right, everybody, welcome back here. Segment 2, Locked On Tigers. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. As always, making us your first listen every single day. Shots with everydayers that do tune in every day. We will, of course, be back on Friday as we take a look back at the remainder of the week, what is happening in the offseason, and again, slowly start to turn the page and start talking about what to expect out of these 2025 Detroit Tigers. We are still waiting to see exactly what that roster will look like when pitchers and catchers report in a little bit under a month's time from now. One of the big question marks will continue to be how legitimate is the Tigers' interest in Alex Bregman. So there's been a couple of updates here on this front. None of them particularly inspiring if you are one of the people that really wants the Tigers to sign Alex Bregman. Evan Petzold of the Freep put out a piece earlier this week that called the Bregman and Tigers situation a standstill. He had a great article that I recommend you go check out and read. Always support Evan. He's fantastic at his job and a fantastic human being. It sounds like, based on everything that he's reported and what the national media is saying, the Tigers won't go near that $200 million mark, and Bregman won't take a short-term deal. So both of them have openly acknowledged interest for each other and have said, hey, I like you, you like me. But then when it comes down to actually discussing terms and figuring out what a contract will look like, they're just staring each other in the eyes and not blinking and not talking. That's the impression I get. That they're just kind of like waiting for the other one to bite, and neither side is really willing to do that. There's also been a lot of momentum towards Bregman to the Red Sox. They have been the favorite to land him for probably over a month now. And it's looking more and more like the writing is kind of on the wall that is maybe going to happen sooner rather than later. We will see. As I always tell all of you beautiful people, reports change daily. Just because a report says one thing one day does not mean that is even going to be true in 24 hours time. So we're going to take it day by day and see what happens going forward. But as it stands right now on Wednesday, January 22nd, odds are looking pretty decent that the Red Sox should be the favorite to land him and that the Tigers are playing hardball and are being stubborn with their evaluation of him and their value of him. And we all know Scott Boras is about as stubborn as it gets in return. So we will see what happens there. If Bregman signs with the Red Sox, is not a Detroit Tiger for whatever reason, then I would imagine they're just going to roll into camp with Veerling and Jace Young and kind of call it a day. And that'll be something we talk about a lot during spring training. But I can't imagine there's too many more. I guess what my overarching thought as it stands right now to the Tigers off season, and again, like from where we are this second, not the all encompassing, off season and review. We'll do that as we get closer to spring training. But like, I really just feel like right now it looks like Bregman or not a whole lot, right? Like they already got Gleyber Torres, they've signed Alex Cobb. Like I'm not saying they've done literally nothing, but from here on out, it really does kind of have the feel of, well, they're in on Bregman and they've shown interest there. But if that doesn't happen, I'm not sure that there's a whole lot else out there for your Detroit Tigers. We'll see how true that is. We'll see what happens in the last, 3.5, 4 weeks here until spring training. But that's it. And I'm not saying that is like the season's already over because they're not going to get Bregman or whatever. Like they made the playoffs without Bregman last year. Like, it's not impossible to win without this dude. And it is the team that is returning is so similar to last year's team that, there's still a reason to be optimistic and there's still a lot of reasons to watch this year. It's just, that's kind of where my head is at looking ahead to the next 3 or 4 weeks, but we'll see. We'll see. As I say all the time, I've been wrong plenty and I'll be wrong again. There are still some other options out there that I guess if they do miss on Bregman, they could go after. Everybody keeps talking about Jack Flaherty from a starting pitching standpoint. I think that's an interesting conversation. We've talked about it before. I don't think that's very likely. I think, heck, at this point, who says he's not a Dodger? But they already have a ton of starting pitchers. I can't imagine that they're gonna. Well, I shouldn't even say that because next thing you know, he's gonna be a Dodger again. I think there's still a big enough market for Flaherty where the Tigers aren't going to prioritize starting pitching enough to pay the price tag that he'll probably inevitably end up signing for. That's just kind of where I stand on him. A player, though, that is still out there that really does genuinely interest me is Ha-Sung Kim. And we've talked about this a lot. We've talked about Kim quite a few times over the winter. I just feel like he fits the profile of the Detroit Tigers organization and what they're trying to accomplish a lot. And he would be a lot cheaper than a player like Bregman. Kim is a very good decision maker in the batter's box. He draws a lot of walks. He does not chase very often. He puts the bat on the ball, and he is an elite defender and can play shortstop even, which isn't something that in the immediate he would do right away, but like maybe down the road, right? Like who's to say if you sign him to a 4-year deal by year 2, he's not playing shortstop because Trey Sweeney and Javi Baez continue, don't really pan out or whatever like that. I'm just saying it gives you options, and he can play third for the time being. I think it's a really, really good fit, and I'm not 100% sure why we haven't heard more about the Tigers being aggressive in pursuing him. Maybe it's just because like Bregman's the top priority, and then once he signs, they'll shift their focus. We'll see. But I think that it's it makes the team better. It's not that big price tag that a lot of people are presuming they're going to have an issue with Bregman, even though we don't really know what his price tag is ultimately going to be. And yeah, if they do swing and miss on that, I think that would be kind of a nice fallback option, but we'll see what happens. All right, let's talk about some old friends that are signing around the league. Just really quickly, kind of a fun check-in on some players that used to be Tigers. Then we'll talk about the Hall of Fame and a few other smaller things. We'll do that right after this. Got to talk to you today about our friends over at Game Time. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, or comedy. One of my favorite memories last year in 2024 was attending, obviously, a plethora of Tigers games. The energy and excitement down the stretch there was truly unmatched. Living in the city is so cool, too. It's just, you can really feel it when a sports team is really good here. It's awesome. Obviously, heartbreaking end of the Lions season, but it was a really fun regular season. You felt that all the time. Same with the Tigers. Now, Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite live events in the city of Detroit and really anywhere where any event that involves tickets. Game Time is there for you. They have a new feature called Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Recently, as you all know, I've said it a lot, I was looking for tickets to a Pistons game. Are over 500 Detroit Pistons with MVP candidate Cade Cunningham. Don't get it twisted. And I used the Game Time app and used Game Time Picks. I found amazing deals and could even see the view of my seat before buying. The super deal was particularly impressive, offering great seats at unbeatable prices. Plus, the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. All right, everybody, welcome back. Your third and final segment of Locked On Tigers. Appreciate you all so much for tuning in as always. So we've talked a lot, obviously, about the current off season. That seems to be every episode. We're just kind of updating and waiting on what the next move is for the Tigers this off season. Some lighter stuff is happening and some really cool stuff is happening around baseball. One, shout out Nico Goodrum, who did just sign a minor league deal with the San Diego Padres. So that's Nico Goodrum's back. Keston Hiura is in Colorado, and Harold Castro is in Harold City, in Kansas City, rather. Harold Castro, Kansas City. So we got the band are trickling in and finding new homes, which is always nice to see. Hall of Fame voting was on Tuesday. I intentionally waited until the Hall of Fame voting was over to record this episode so that we could talk about the results a little bit. Not going to spend too much time on it because there's no Tigers that got into the Hall of Fame this year, but still some conversations to be had, and it's always kind of just a fun talking point for baseball fans. Ichiro Suzuki, CC Sabathia, and Billy Wagner, baby. We did it. Billy Wagner is in the Hall of Fame. We did it. It's been a 10-year battle for the Billy Wagner faithful out there, but he finally made it. Absolutely deserved. All three of them absolutely deserved. Ichiro was one vote away from unanimous. I would love to know, and I'm sure that it will be known by Wednesday afternoon, who the writer is, who the voter is that did not vote for Ichiro Suzuki to be a Hall of Famer. It's fascinating to me that is possible. So interesting development there, but absolutely deserves to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. CC Sabathia as well. Billy Wagner with 82.5% cruises in. He absolutely does. Carlos Beltran's knocking on the door. It looks like he's probably going to get in next time around. Got over 70%. Andrew Jones, 66%, continues to get higher and higher up that list as well. Chase Utley with just under 40%. A-Rod with 37%. A-Rod's so fascinating to me because if there was no controversy attached to A-Rod, he would have been a unanimous first ballot. I genuinely believe that. Right? Like if you aren't old enough to remember like prime A-Rod or weren't around from the beginning to the end of his career, like maybe it's hard to grasp how good he was. Alex Rodriguez is one of the best all-around baseball players to ever step foot on a diamond. But there was a lot of controversy with him. There's a lot of PED, I would say allegations, but he just came out and said like he took him at one point. So not really allegations, like confirmed, right? He did that, and that's always going to be tough for those players to get on the Hall. I do think that the Hall of Fame kind of is a little picky and choosy. Like there are some players who have been linked to roids or have been found on lists that are in the Hall of Fame, and then some that aren't. I think that's kind of unfair, but I totally understand why there's hesitation on guys. Barry Bonds isn't in the Hall of Fame, right? Pete Rose isn't in the Hall of Fame, not for steroids. That's obviously a gambling thing, but like there's it's just like there's always something. Every year there's always something that everybody has to argue about, and A-Rod seems to be the next man up as Bonds and like Schilling is another one, Clemens another one, right? Like there's just so many guys that fall into that kind of arc of just controversy leading to their Hall of Fame candidacy being controversial. Few Tigers that did make the list down ballot and did get some votes. Francisco Rodriguez, the great K-Rod, who we all remember so fondly in Detroit. His first year was actually not bad. It was his second year that was just an absolute train wreck. Gets a little bit over 10% of the vote. Torrey Hunter with a little bit over 5% of the vote. Ian Kinsler with 2.5%. Who else? Curtis Granderson gets 3 votes for the Hall of Fame. Obviously was never going to make it, but good for Grandy, man. Good for Grandy. One of my mom's favorite Detroit Tigers of all time. One of my favorite Detroit Tigers of all time. Anybody who's like around my age and grew up with that 06 team, how can you not love Curtis Granderson? And then my personal favorite on this list did not receive a vote, which is very sad to me. But Fernando Rodney on the Hall of Fame ballot, unfortunately, 0 votes. What else? I think that's pretty much everything I got. Ben Johnson to the Bears. Boo, 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 boo. Vote Cade Cunningham for All-Star. Listen to Locked On Pistons. Koo does a great job. Thanks for making Locked On Tigers your first listen every single day. Shout out to the everydayers that do tune in every day. And we will, of course, be back on Friday as we send you off into the weekend with more news and notes and 2025 Detroit Tigers talk. See you then, baby. Peace and love. Going to therapy's dope. Go Tigers.